Hollywood loves to boast about its futuristic visions, but not every sci-fi dream was meant to shine. Some films were pushed aside, mocked, or quietly buried in the vaults, as if the studios hoped we'd forget they ever happened. But you know what? Time has a funny way of digging them back up. Which so-called disasters turned into cult legends, and which remain cinematic wrecks best left in the shadows? Let's find out. Plan 9 from Outer Space, 1959. Let's kick things off with what's often called the worst film ever made. Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space was never meant to be buried. It was simply so bad that audiences, critics, and Hollywood itself wanted to pretend it didn't exist. Released in 1959, this was Ed Wood's grand attempt at an alien invasion story, complete with flying saucers on strings, cardboard tombstones, and dialogue so awkward it feels like it was typed in one sitting. The plot? Aliens reanimate human corpses to stop us from inventing a weapon that could destroy the universe. Sounds epic, right? In execution, it was chaos. The spaceships were hubcaps dangling on wires, day and night shots switched without explanation, and poor Bela Lugosi, who had passed away before filming, appears in a handful of recycled test shots before being replaced by Wood's chiropractor wearing a cape over his face. That's the level of desperation we're talking about. At the time, Plan 9 was dismissed as cheap, trashy, and incompetent. But here's the twist. The very flaws that buried it also gave it eternal life. By the 1980s, it was rebranded as So Bad It's Good, and crowned by critics as the ultimate cult movie. It became the poster child of midnight screenings, riffed endlessly by fans, and immortalized in Tim Burton's Ed Wood biopic. Hollywood may have laughed at it, but audiences never stopped watching. The film's legacy isn't one of failure, but of survival through sheer absurdity. If you've ever wondered how a disaster can become a legend, Plan 9 is your answer. Robot Monster, 1953. Now, imagine you're making a science fiction blockbuster in 1953, smack in the middle of the Cold War paranoia boom. Aliens, atomic power, flying saucers, the audience was hungry for it. Instead, what they got was Robot Monster, a film that looks like it was shot over a weekend in Griffith Park with about $10 and a borrowed gorilla suit. The villain, Ro-Man, an alien robot monster, wearing a gorilla costume and a deep-sea diving helmet topped with rabbit ear antennas. He spends most of the movie wandering through rocks and caves while mumbling into a bubble machine. Yes, you heard that right. A bubble machine is his portal to the alien mothership. Even by 1950s B-movie standards, this was bottom of the barrel. The story follows the last survivors of Earth trying to outwit Ro-Man after he's supposedly wiped out all of humanity with his calcinator death ray. The acting is wooden, the effects are laughable, and the sound design feels like it was recorded in someone's garage. Critics tore it apart instantly, and Hollywood practically disowned it, embarrassed to even acknowledge its existence. But here's the kicker. Robot Monster made money. Filmed in cheap 3D, it drew curious crowds who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Over time, its status shifted from embarrassment to cult treasure. It's been riffed by comedians, showcased in documentaries about bad cinema, and beloved by fans who embrace its sincere, if utterly doomed, attempt at grandeur. Hollywood may have buried Robot Monster, but the image of that gorilla suit and diving helmet is forever etched in sci-fi history. Sometimes, failure is unforgettable. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, 1964. If there's one sci-fi movie that makes you question whether Hollywood executives lost a bet, it's Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Released in 1964, this bizarre mashup of Christmas cheer and low-budget space opera was marketed to kids, but it ended up confusing everyone. The Martians, worried that their children are obsessed with Earth's television, decide to kidnap Santa Claus to bring some joy to Mars. Yes, that's the plot. The costumes look like they were made from leftover felt. The Martian helmets wobble with every step, and the sets appear one gust of wind away from collapsing. Santa, played with relentless cheer by John Call, spends much of the film cracking corny jokes while trying to bring holiday spirit to green-painted aliens. The film's soundtrack even introduced the earworm Hooray for Santy Claus, which has been haunting late-night television reruns ever since. Critics shredded the film upon release, calling it one of the most shameless holiday tie-ins ever produced. The New York Times famously dismissed it as a children's movie of the lowest order, and even families looking for Christmas entertainment avoided it after a few painful screenings. Hollywood studios quickly buried it, embarrassed to have their names attached. And yet, much like a fruitcake no one asked for but keeps showing up anyway, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians refused to disappear. Public domain status meant it popped up endlessly on cheap VHS tapes, late-night broadcasts, and eventually Mystery Science Theater 3000, where it found new life as a comedy punching bag. Today it's adored by cult fans who embrace its campy charm every holiday season. Hollywood may have wanted it gone, but once you've seen Santa and Martians in a slapstick showdown, you never forget it. Zardoz, 1974. Few images from cinema are more infamous than Sean Connery in a red loincloth, thigh-high boots, and a bullet bandolier, pointing a revolver with deadly seriousness. That's Zardoz, John Borman's 1974 dystopian fever dream that Hollywood tried its best to bury under layers of embarrassment. Set in a distant future where an eternal elite called the Eternals rule over brutish exterminators, the film dives headfirst into surrealism. Connery plays Zed, a brutal enforcer who discovers that his god, Zardoz, is actually a giant floating stone head that spews out rifles while booming, "The gun is good, the penis is evil." Lines like that doomed the movie to ridicule, even before audiences had a chance to process its allegories. Critics had no mercy. Roger Ebert called it wretched excess, and others labeled it incoherent, pretentious, and downright laughable. Connery himself reportedly struggled to land roles after the film, as Hollywood insiders couldn't shake the image of him parading around in what looked like fantasy cosplay gone wrong. MGM, the studio behind it, gave it a quiet release and quickly shoved it into the background once reviews tanked. But like many buried films, Zardoz found a second life. In the 1980s and 90s, cult audiences rediscovered it on VHS, latching onto its bizarre visuals, haunting set design, and trippy philosophical themes. Today it's cited as one of the boldest, strangest sci-fi experiments of its era. Hollywood tried to pretend it never happened, but the internet immortalized the red costume meme forever. Sometimes the film studios want you to forget are the very ones audiences cling to the hardest. Moon, 1969. Before Star Wars or even Star Trek, the motion picture Hammer Films, best known for gothic horror, decided to try something wild, a space western. The result was Moon 02, a 1969 oddity that promised six-shooter shootouts in zero gravity. The tagline sold it as the first moon western, but audiences didn't know what to make of it. The film follows Bill Kemp, a washed-up astronaut-turned-salvage operator, navigating lunar saloons, asteroid claim jumpers, and corrupt industrialists. Imagine high noon on the moon with all the psychedelic color schemes of the swinging 60s. It should have been campy fun, but its release came just months after Neil Armstrong's moon landing. Suddenly, watching fake saloons on the moon felt a little silly when viewers could turn on the news and see the real thing. Critics dismissed it as confused, unsure whether it wanted to be parody or serious sci-fi adventure. The Monthly Film Bulletin called it appealing only to less demanding juvenile audiences. Hammer itself quickly abandoned sci-fi after the failure, quietly returning to horror where it was safe. For decades, Moon 02 lived as a cinematic embarrassment until cult rediscovery changed its fate. In 1990, Mystery Science Theater 3000 mocked it mercilessly, introducing it to a new generation who loved its ridiculous charm. Fans came to appreciate its retro-futuristic costumes, surprisingly strong special effects for the budget, and its psychedelic score. What Hollywood tried to bury has since become a time capsule of late 60s sci-fi aesthetics. It's not good in the traditional sense, but it's unforgettable, and sometimes that's all it takes to be remembered forever. Battlefield Earth 2000. Every decade has its infamous bomb, but Battlefield Earth might be the crown jewel of cinematic disasters. Released in 2000 and starring John Travolta at the height of his post-Pulp Fiction comeback, this sci-fi epic was based on the novel by L. Ron Hubbard. Travolta pushed hard to make it happen, calling it his passion project. Unfortunately, audiences and critics called it something else entirely: torture. Set in the year 3000, Earth is enslaved by giant alien cyclos, with Travolta himself donning dreadlocks, nose plugs, and a booming voice that sounded more like a Saturday Night Live sketch than an intimidating villain. The film's visuals leaned on endless Dutch angles, green-tinted cinematography, and cheap special effects that made it look like a made-for-TV movie instead of a $73 million blockbuster. Critics annihilated it. Roger Ebert gave it half a star, calling it a film that doesn't know how bad it is. Audiences laughed at the overwrought dialogue, cartoonish acting, and scenes that seemed stitched together from rejected comic book panels. Hollywood studios quickly distanced themselves, burying its marketing after opening weekend when it crashed at the box office, barely scraping together $29 million worldwide. But here's the twist. Because it failed so spectacularly, Battlefield Earth has lived on. It's become a textbook example of how not to adapt science fiction. Filmmaking classes study its mistakes, comedians roast it endlessly, and its clips continue to spread online, long after Hollywood tried to shove it into the abyss. Travolta called it a noble failure, but for many fans, it's a guilty pleasure, the kind of train wreck you can't look away from. Hollywood tried to erase it, but in doing so, they cemented its place as the ultimate cult catastrophe. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. When David Bowie agreed to star in Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth, it seemed like a perfect fit. Bowie was already seen as otherworldly, a musician who lived on the edge of alien mystique. Playing Thomas Jerome Newton, an extraterrestrial stranded on Earth, should have been his defining screen moment. Instead, the studio's interference buried what could have been one of the most ambitious sci-fi films of the 1970s. The movie follows Newton as he tries to use advanced technology to save his dying home planet, only to become corrupted by human greed, addiction, and despair. Roeg's direction is dreamlike, filled with surreal imagery, fractured editing, and long, hypnotic sequences. It was bold, experimental, and unlike anything else in theaters at the time, which is exactly why the studio panicked. Executives butchered the original cut, trimming Roeg's sprawling vision down into something more conventional. What audiences saw in 1976 was a fragmented film that confused critics and frustrated fans. Reviews were mixed to brutal, and box office returns were disappointing. Hollywood buried it quickly, treating it as a failed art project not worth saving. But the story didn't end there. Over the years, restored cuts have circulated, and Bowie's haunting performance has been reevaluated as one of his finest screen roles. Today it's praised as a daring, visionary sci-fi drama that was simply too strange for its time. Hollywood tried to smother its flame, but like Bowie himself, the film refused to fade quietly into the background. Instead, it became an icon of outsider cinema, the kind of buried treasure cinephiles proudly unearth. Nothing Lasts Forever. 1984. Now, here's a strange case. MGM produced a sci-fi comedy in 1984 with a dream cast: Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Zach Galligan, fresh off Gremlins. Written and directed by Tom Schiller, a longtime Saturday Night Live writer, Nothing Lasts Forever was designed as a quirky black-and-white throwback to 1930s fantasy films. So, why haven't you heard of it? Because MGM shelved it before it even hit theaters. The story follows an aspiring artist who is forced into a bizarre dystopian society where creativity is outlawed. Eventually, he's sent on a bus trip to the moon, where elderly retirees and dreamlike adventures await. It's part sci-fi satire, part surreal comedy, and part love letter to classic Hollywood. But executives couldn't figure out how to market it. Was it a comedy, an art film, a genre spoof? Their answer was to do nothing. The film sat in MGM's vaults for decades, unreleased and largely forgotten. Bootlegs circulated among hardcore fans, and occasional festival screenings teased what might have been. Bill Murray himself reportedly described it as one of his favorite oddball projects, even though it barely saw the light of day. It wasn't until the internet age that clips began surfacing, sparking curiosity and cementing its reputation as a lost cult classic. Today, it's appreciated as a bizarre time capsule of 1980s comedy, meeting surreal sci-fi. Hollywood may have tried to bury it forever, but fans dug it back up and embraced its weirdness. Ironically, the film's title turned out to be wrong because when it comes to cult movies, nothing really does last forever, especially not obscurity. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Few sci-fi films are as darkly strange or as controversial as A Boy and His Dog. Directed by L.Q. Jones and based on Harlan Ellison's novella, this 1975 cult film imagined a post-apocalyptic wasteland where survival meant brutal choices. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with it. Critics were shocked, audiences were divided, and the film was quietly pushed aside. The story follows Vic, played by a young Don Johnson, wandering through the scorched remains of civilization with his telepathic dog, Blood. The dog, voiced with dry wit, guides Vic through scavenging, fighting off roving gangs, and searching for food. But survival isn't just about hunger. The film's ending, involving a shocking moral twist, guaranteed that mainstream acceptance was never in the cards. Audiences in the mid-70s, still reeling from Vietnam and Watergate, weren't ready for a sci-fi film this bleak. Critics slammed it as distasteful and cruel. Hollywood executives, already unsure how to market such a grim, low-budget movie, buried it quickly. Don Johnson himself admitted that for years it was the one credit on his resume nobody wanted to talk about. And yet, like many films Hollywood tried to forget, it grew in stature. Writers like George Miller cited it as an inspiration for Mad Max. Cult audiences embraced its cynicism, seeing it as one of the first post-apocalyptic films to fully commit to the brutality of a collapsed society. Today, it's a permanent entry in the conversation about how far sci-fi is willing to go in exploring human nature. Hollywood may have turned its back, but fans never stopped digging it up. Slipstream, 1989. On paper, Slipstream should have been a sci-fi hit. Directed by Steven Lisberger, the man behind Tron, and starring Mark Hamill, Bill Paxton, and Academy Award winner F. Murray Abraham, this 1989 film had talent, ambition, and a $25 million budget. Instead, it crashed so hard that it barely made it into theaters before being buried in direct-to-video obscurity. The plot unfolds in a futuristic world, reshaped by a powerful jet stream known as the Slipstream, where people travel in small aircraft across ravaged landscapes. Hamill plays Tasker, a stern lawman, while Paxton is a drifter who kidnaps a prisoner, leading to a chase across dangerous skies. The film was pitched as a sweeping science fiction epic with action, philosophy, and spectacle. But here's the problem. Nobody could figure out what it wanted to be. Was it a Western, a road movie, a philosophical meditation on freedom, or just a post-apocalyptic chase film? Critics described it as muddled, with dazzling aerial shots undercut by a slow, confusing story. Marketing was nearly non-existent, and the studio quietly gave up on pushing it to audiences. Despite its burial, Slipstream has become a hidden gem for cult fans. The aerial cinematography is still breathtaking, and Hamill, eager to prove he wasn't just Luke Skywalker, delivers one of his most unusual performances. Bill Paxton brings his signature charm, and the film's strange tone makes it oddly unforgettable. Hollywood wanted to forget it, but the internet has kept its wings flapping. Today, it's remembered less as a failure and more as a daring experiment that couldn't quite land. Freejack, 1992. Imagine a sci-fi action thriller starring Emilio Estevez, Anthony Hopkins, and rock legend Mick Jagger. Sounds like a guaranteed cult hit, right? Instead, Freejack turned into one of the early 90s most mocked flops, and Hollywood wasted no time burying it under the rug. Set in a near future where the wealthy cheat death by transferring their minds into younger bodies, the film follows. Estevez is a race car driver who snatched from the past moments before his fatal crash. Jagger plays the bounty hunter sent to capture him, while Hopkins chews through the role of a sinister corporate tycoon orchestrating the scheme. The premise had potential, but the execution was a mess. Special effects looked cheap, the action was clunky, and the script read like it had been patched together from half a dozen other films. Critics tore it apart, audiences ignored it, and the studio quickly downplayed its existence. The fact that Hopkins signed on just before winning an Oscar for The Silence of the Lambs only made the embarrassment worse. Yet, here's the kicker. Like many buried sci-fi misfires, Freejack refused to stay dead. Its camp value, oddball casting, and over-the-top performances turned it into a guilty pleasure for fans of so-bad-it's-good cinema. Clips circulate online. Jagger's hammy performance is endlessly memed, and Estevez himself has joked about it in interviews. Hollywood may have buried Freejack, but fans keep exhuming it, if only to laugh at its audacity. Saturn, 3/1980. What happens when you put Kirk Douglas, Farrah Fawcett, and Harvey Keitel in a futuristic love triangle with a murderous robot? You get Saturn III, a 1980 sci-fi thriller that Hollywood seemed to regret the moment it hit theaters. Directed by Stanley Donen, better known for musicals like Singin' in the Rain, this film was meant to be Fox's answer to Alien. Instead, it turned into a glossy disaster. The story takes place on a remote Saturn outpost where lovers Alex by Douglas and Adam by Fawcett live in isolation, researching food supplies for Earth. Their peace shatters when Keitel's character arrives with a hulking robot named Hector, built to assist, but quickly turning into a nightmare. The robot develops disturbing emotions and begins competing with Douglas for Fawcett's attention, leading to a mix of psychological tension and campy melodrama. On paper, it had all the ingredients of a gripping sci-fi thriller. In execution, it was a train wreck. Critics hammered the awkward dialogue, the clunky effects, and the laughably mismatched performances. Harvey Keitel was famously dubbed over by another actor, giving his character a bizarrely detached presence. Douglas, well into his 60s, seemed miscast opposite Fawcett, who was marketed heavily as the film's main draw. Audiences didn't buy it. Saturn III bombed at the box office, grossing just $9 million against a bloated budget, and Fox quickly pulled the plug on any promotional push. Hollywood buried it in the vaults, embarrassed that a supposed prestige project had turned into late-night cable filler. But time, as always, changed things. The robot Hector became a cult icon among fans of practical effects, and Fawcett's retro-futuristic costumes gave the film a strange visual appeal. Today, Saturn III is remembered not as a hidden masterpiece, but as one of those gloriously misguided sci-fi experiments that's too weird to ignore. Hollywood may have tried to erase it, but cult audiences made sure it lives on. And there you have it, 12 sci-fi films that Hollywood tried to bury, only to have fans dig them back up from the rubble. Some became cult treasures, others stayed disasters, but every one of them proved that even failure leaves a mark. Which of these buried gems do you think deserves a second chance? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's strangest stories. The past may not always shine, but it never really disappears.